The internal auditory meatus is this hole here in the petrous portion of the temporal bone. It gets, we've already done 6 up with the superior orbital fissure for the eye. So now we are at the facial, which is feel and vary on that mnemonic. And we have the facial nerve. Now the facial nerve is the first one that has all 4 modalities. And this SA around the ear, I'm not as concerned about, but we should know that it is SSA for taste now. So the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, the feeling like pain, hot, cold, those sorts of feelings are on 5, but taste is its own sense. It is SSA, and it is on the facial nerve. And we have the second group of muscles for SE, the muscles of facial expression. Now in class, we usually have a fun exercise where we all make silly faces and play with our muscles of facial expression. I'm hoping that you can remember facial expression, facial nerve. So this is you squint, you smile, you frown, you make silly fishy faces. All of those silly faces and the movement of the face is the facial nerve. It also has some VE to the lacrimal glands and 2 of the salivary glands. And then we have cranial nerve number 8, the vestibulocochlear. And this is for SSA, but hearing and balance. We get 2 senses. It's important to remember that the vestibular system is for balance or equilibrium. This is the piece of the inner ear that detects movement. This is the one that's affected by the spinning chair. This is the one that tells you up and down when you dive into a swimming pool. So the vestibular system, and then the cochlea is about hearing. Now, in the lab book and several other books, you'll see that this nerve can also be called the auditory nerve, and I will accept that. However, if you are studying for your TEAS test or your HESI to get into nursing school, you will need to know that it is called the vestibulocochlear, because that is the one that they expect on that exam. So that's why I teach the harder name. Vestibulocochlear is harder, but the name tells you what it does. Next is the jugular foramen, which is for the jugular vein. Remember that the jugular vein, jugulars are always veins. Carotids are always arteries, so we don't have any arteries here, just the vein. And we get 9, so this was good, and oops, that's OOD, and this is velvet, and this was the A of ah. And glossopharyngeal is the first one that does all 4 modalities. The key to glossopharyngeal is breaking it down. The word glosso means the tongue. The glossus is the tongue, and pharyngeal is the throat. So the name of this nerve means the tongue and the throat. So we're going for SA and SSA to the posterior third of the tongue. So now we're doing the back of the tongue. The sense of taste that is most commonly associated with the back of your tongue is bitter, which is why bitter can make you gag, because glossopharyngeal is part of the gag reflex, and it's swallowing. When you first swallow, that's a voluntary motion, so that's SE, and we pick up another salivary gland. So it has all 4. 10 has all 4. So 7, 9, and 10 have all 4 modalities. Now, I'm not as worried about the SA around the eardrum. Taste to the most posterior tongue is kind of interesting. Muscles of the larynx and the vocal cords, but you'll notice this big red star next to the VE. I really need you to know about the VE, parasympathetic, from the vagus. Now the name vagus means the wanderer, meaning it's going to go from your brain all the way down to your digestive system. When we say all of the thoracic, it goes to the heart, the arteries, the lungs. It goes to most of the abdominal cavity. It goes to your stomach, your pancreas, your liver, all of your small intestine, and the first half of your large intestine. It ends at what we call the left colic flexure, which is on your left side next to your spleen. It's a very long nerve, and it covers a lot of things. This is the one nerve that you will have to know in physiology. We do the vagus a lot. So that's why it gets the big red star. Guaranteed to be on the test. I'll tell you what's on the test. You still have to know it. And then finally, 11 is the accessory nerve. This is an odd nerve, and that we get, part of it is from the spinal cord nerves. So spinal nerves C1 and C2, they fuse together. they go up through the foramen magnum here. So they come up here from the spine, and then they go back down the jugular as the accessory nerve. Why do they do that? No idea. They just do. So they go to some of the muscles of the neck, including trapezius in the back, like levator scapulae. Basically, with accessory, if you can remember its number and its name, you're good. Out of the set, the vagus is the most important, but I'll remind you that 7, 9, and 10 have all 4 modalities. All right, our last nerve is the hypoglossal. Comes from the hypoglossal canal, which is found here in the walls of the foramen magnum. It actually goes under the occipital condyle. It is cranial nerve number 12, hypoglossal. Now, the key again is break down the name. Hypo means under. Glossus or glosso means tongue, which means that it's going to be SE to the muscles of the tongue. It comes from under the tongue. I want you to think of this nerve as the puppet master of the tongue. It's coming from under the tongue, and it's going to control the muscles of the tongue. Glossopharyngeal means tongue and throat. It's on the surface, so it's the sensory. So that's how you remember which one does which. So we're at the muscles of the tongue. And that is the last of those slides. One of the things I want to do with the end of that lecture is this. I'm going to add a slide here at the end so I can draw with you guys. So I have a blank slide here at the end of this lecture piece because I want to draw and work with you with the tongue for a moment. The tongue is a very complicated organ. We see that it comes down, it's kind of this shape, and then it's got this line across it. Here's the uvula in the back. That's the little thing that sticks down in the bottom of your throat. And what we want to do is we want to break down the pieces of the tongue. Now, what we see is that for this anterior 2/3, SA is 5 part 3, that mandibular branch of the trigeminal. But when we look at this piece, taste, SSA, that's the taste, is from 7, the facial nerve. So we have 2 nerves that come here versus if I look at the posterior third, we see that it is cranial nerve number 9, and that's supposed to be a CN here. And that's for both touch and taste, right? It's both SSA. So we have 3 nerves just doing that much. At the very posterior of the tongue, I use X's to remind us that this is cranial nerve 10. There's a little bit of SSA from the vagus. And the whole tongue is SE, is cranial nerve number 12, the hypoglossal. So we have 5 nerves that go to the tongue. And I hope that this drawing helps you. I added it at the end.